Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Boxer. I work for GEMS Education. I run our online learning, among other efforts. I'm not nearly as talented or prepared as Kate Silverton, who was sadly taken ill this morning. So I hope all of you, especially our panelists, will forgive me. But it is about the 21st century learner, so I will be learning as we go along. But certainly a lot of you are more informed on the topic than I am, and we'll have lots of opportunity for questions. So good morning. I'm going to sit down. So last night we all had the teacher. It's all about the teacher. But this session is all about the learner. So I think it's wonderful that we move from the conveyor of knowledge to the recipient. I'm a 20th century learner. I have 2 children. I live in Silicon Valley, California. They're 2 and 6. Each of them has an iPad. Both of them are entirely adept at the iPad. The older one, who's 6, is entirely comfortable connecting to the internet, searching terms. I can already see that their learning experience is going to be very different than my own. We have an amazing panel who each come to the topic of the learner from very different perspectives. So I've given my perspective and experience of the 21st century learner. And if you don't mind, I thought I'd ask each of you from your work to just give us a sense of your experience of the 21st century learner. So Madhav, if I could start with you.
So you got to describe, hello?
Yeah.
To describe the 21st century learner, whether living in Silicon Valley with, in a high-income family or not, I think the common characteristic, well, maybe. I think the common characteristic perhaps around the world is going to be that this 21st century learner has had much wider exposure and will have much wider exposure than the 20th century learner, even in the 1990s or 1980s. It started changing with the advent of the television, but it's gone even beyond that now. This learner with so many television channels now is short on attention span, is high on aspirations and low on patience. So if you expect these learners to learn the same way as I suppose if you are 20th century, I'm 19th century. So the patience to go through a long curriculum and in-depth studying that is expected in the old curriculum, I think may be true, may be possible for some, but largely not, is how I would put it. And so the way the learning is going to be organized, I think the 19th, 20th century learners were taught and not so much as learned. And you've said learner now. I think more and more the younger kids are learning on their own, and they may not necessarily respect the authority of a teacher and say the teacher knows best. Of course, you can impose that authority through a school under the guise of discipline and whatever, but I think more and more children are going to say, I too know something. Not quite articulated that way, but they do know a lot. And unfortunately, the curriculum inside the school is not catching up with that. And I gave an example yesterday. Kids saw the World Cup, and none of those countries were covered in their geography syllabus. But they knew all the countries, they knew the players, they knew the scores, they had their heroes. Or when India launches the Mangalyaan to the Mars, that doesn't reflect, the teacher has no clue what it is, and nobody explains it to them, but it's in the newspapers. So how did that happen? There was a case of a kid learning English, and he came back to the teacher and said, what does hangover mean? Well, hangover is not an Indian word, so to say. Hangover is very Indian, though. But it was a part of a song, very popular song in Bollywood. And he wanted to know, what does this mean? Somebody told him it's an English word. And the teacher did not quite know whether to explain or not explain, because she was in a dilemma whether to say it's what your pop gets on Saturday mornings, but she didn't say that. So I think there is a conflict between the curriculum as it has been conceived over the last 200 years and what it is now, what they are expected to learn, what they want to learn, what they can learn, and what they should learn.
Mhm.
So uh, it's a conflicting situation. I'll come back later on.
All right, Gabriel. So we had out-of-date curriculum, short attention span, low on patience. You deal with adult learners. What's your experience?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. I agree with Madhav that that's what 21st century learners will be eventually. But in this century, we still have a lot of adults that need to learn and adapt to an economy that is much more the 21st century economy. But these adults grew up in a 20th century schooling, and that's what we are dealing with in Latin America. We train 22,000 students already in Latin America, average age 29, that all of them drop out from high school, will not go to college, and trying to find a better job or a better income in the companies where they are. And those are 21st century learners as well. They don't have these uh, perhaps conditions on these of these factors that Madhav was saying, but they need to be ready to work in a 21st century economy. So we what we are trying to do, and many I think emerging markets are trying to do as well, is how you uh, educate or make these adults learn both hard skills and soft skills. You are talking about soft skills in many ways, that skills, but also tolerance, empathy, how to solve problems, many skills that are demand now in the labor market that many of these adults didn't get when they were at school. So how can you make an adult a lifelong learner if he or she didn't get it while he was in primary school or high school? That's the challenge we are we're trying to tackle and face in at least in Latin America in the work I do. And, 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 and I think a lot of this 21st century learning has to include and engage technologies, because even if they didn't get some of these skills that you were mentioning in school, they probably will need to deal with some kind of technology in their work. And they will need to deal, and if they want to move up in their jobs, they will need to know some technology or be related to technology. So in everything we do, we try to get technology and teach through technology, teach through blended learning technologies. So these adults can get these skills, can get these soft skills, but also can get knowledge and can get used to how technology work or can be used in a workplace.
All right, Esther, your South African experience. I think you're the only possibly 21st century learner here, so you have a double insight. Your experience in South Africa,
Well, I
please.
mean, just when you're saying that, I think if we're talking about 21st century learners and we're talking about promoting lifelong learners, I think the first step would be to change the perception that a learner is just somebody who's studying in a university, and that we have to sort of, broaden our idea of what it means to learn in the 21st century. And then my experience comes from, I've taught 2 years in school in Cape Town, South Africa, which really deals with learners from disadvantaged backgrounds, empowering them with good education and good facilities to really help them enter tertiary education and be successful. And I think my experience there, the complexity there is that the narrative is really that if you want to be successful in education, it really means rising above your community and almost leaving your community behind. And that made me really sort of change my understanding of what it means to be educated and what we want to achieve. So the first thing I would say is that I think we often phrase education as in service of employer needs without really talking about greater human concerns and the challenges facing young people right there in their context, in their communities. And if I had to phrase, what we should be talking about, I think it's about 21st century citizens and what it means to really be educated. In my sense, the purpose of education should obviously be, in a sense, to employ young people for the working environment, but that education serves a broader purpose or a higher purpose than simply the working environment, and that it serves society by educating its citizens. And for me, a 21st century learner is somebody who, where learning is about being someone as opposed to becoming something somewhere in the future, and that education institutions should be places that really empower young people to play a role, not just one day that your education will be worthwhile once when you're employed or somewhere in the future, but it must really be something that engages you now, not only building connections between school and the working environment, but engaging learners in real life problems, real life issues within their communities. And Kerry Fraser says, we talk about, you know, the 21st century and all the uncertainty and complexities that we see in the future. Education institutions should really be about building the future rather than sort of securing us for the future or helping us adapt to the future, and really become active institutions within society. And I think that really means saying that young people, we talk about young people as leaders of tomorrow, where really we should be engaging them and empowering them to be leaders today within their societies. And that also makes learning a more real experience as opposed to something that's in your textbook and in your classroom, and sort of connect that with real life.
Lutfey, you work for one of the biggest banks in the world.
Yes.
What's the 21st century learner for you?
So if I could just start by making an observation that
Sure.
Just over 3 decades ago, I was a primary school student here in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was the labor attaché with the Embassy of Bangladesh, trying to help the hundreds and thousands of workers coming here, some skilled, mostly unskilled, coming here at the time. And I think there is, for me to be here as a member of the Academy for the Global Teachers Prize and on a panel on skills, there's a bit of a Bollywood plotline to that, which I'm really getting a kick out of. 21st century learner. So I come, if you like, from the demand side of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
We recruit, we hire, and I look for certain things from people. The 21st century learner needs to, if I were to put it in a nutshell, needs to race against this high-speed onslaught of automation that's coming about, that's making routine tasks, that's making more and more tasks routine, and then making routine tasks make your skills go obsolete fairly quickly, while at the same time dealing with a VUCA world, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and doing that without motion sickness, because it's continuous. What VUCA means is that the world is interconnected in very complex manners. So we need to be able to navigate that. So, you know, pirate-like, Jack Sparrow, that's the 21st century learner, resourceful, on the move. And secondly, continuous change means continuous learning. And as I said, we've got to try and do that without motion sickness. I think to do that, the 21st century learner needs to get out of the mindset that there is somehow a trichotomy between hard skills, soft skills, and values. The fact of the matter is, you need all three. And I'd be happy to elaborate on that.
Okay. So just to follow up on that, Esther, you talked about we shouldn't just be thinking about education for jobs. Andreas Schleicher, in his great intro yesterday, made this wonderful point about we should work backwards from skills that keep people employed to curricula, rather than starting in curricula and jobs and kind of welding these two together. So how do we marry the urgent need for real jobs and real skills with a more holistic education?
Yeah. Well, I think what you mentioned is very important in saying that, first of all, I want to say that when we talk about knowledge and skills without adding values, it's actually a very dangerous conversation, because we have this romantic idea of education being just good. Whereas if you look at history, very educated people did very destructive and bad things. And some of the issues we are currently sitting with in society were not brought about by uneducated people, but people with PhDs and MBAs and very well educated people. So I sort of want to emphasize that point about that. And then I think what I would say about connecting or having a more holistic approach is that I think we often see having meaning or educating people to live within society and with respect to other people as opposed to employer needs, and that I think those two should be combined. And when we talk about how do we prepare education for or young people for moving into the job market, the conversation shouldn't just be how does education deliver young people who are prepared for the working environment. The bigger question that we sort of should tackle together as a working environment and as the education sector is the education sector should be preparing young people to address the fundamental issues of our society, and the working environment has a role to play in creating a space for us to do that. And I think when you're talking about curriculum and bringing that about, we have to acknowledge that there's a difference between knowledge, skills, and values, and actually, or acquiring those things, and actually knowing and acting and being differently. And that is why I think it's important to connect young people with their current context and seeing them as citizens and active role players, because if you want to bring that change from just having all these things to actually acting differently, I think you have to stop separating the school environment from the issues within their societies, and that actually gives their education a purpose.
Lutfey's shaking his head, so I want to give him a chance. Then I'm going to
I agree with all of that, but I think it's a false dichotomy or trichotomy, if the teachers over here would forgive me for totally inventing the word. I think you need all three. You need hard skills. There need to be some core skills that makes you economically productive. You need soft skills so that you're able to deliver them in a certain manner. But you absolutely need values to contextualize them, and so as not to abuse these skills, as you mentioned. And I think if you look at what's happening right now, there is probably a generational change going on, where sustainability is very much on the mainstream agenda. Diversity is very much on the mainstream agenda. And when we look to hire people from Gen Y, for example, they want to know what is the purpose of the organization. But I think you need all three, and it's not one or the other. I don't want people here to think that you don't have to do the hard work and do Singapore maths, for example.
Yeah. All right, Gabriel, you're teaching students who essentially dropped out of high school.
Right.
Are you teaching them what they should have learned in high school or something else?
I'm teaching something else, and agreeing and disagreeing with you guys. I think that we have to include knowledge, skills, and values, and everything you guys said. But if you look at the educational system now, at least in Latin America, where I'm focused, they are teaching much more that broader thing that you're saying, and much less skills to work. So you find in almost every country in Latin America a big disconnection between the labor demand and any labor market, not just a for-profit bank, NGOs, governments. You see a big disconnection between the demand and what schools are supplying. So even though I agree with your ideal of combining both, and I think it's key, you see right now that schools are not providing those skills that the student needs to move up in his or her career. And you see even I think a bigger problem in the majority of emerging markets, but in Latin America you have 50% of dropout rate. 80% of population will not graduate from college. So it's interesting to talk about these 21st century skills for some people that end up finishing college and finishing a master's or a PhD. But the majority of the population, at least in the 32 countries in Latin America that I'm looking at, is that 50% of dropout rate and 80% of college, and that will not be solved the next 5 years. So how do we get these skills, these values to those people that not only need to have a life and move up in their careers, but they need to add also to our societies to make our countries and our societies more productive and eradicate poverty, improve conditions of life. So how can we make this big chunk of our societies 21st century learners as well, or 21st century skilled learners? No, that I think is the challenge that is hard to combine. And I don't see now the school systems in Latin America providing those skills that people need to work the 40, 50 years of life that they will be working. No?
I'd like to give a different spin on this. You see, glad you brought in, Siddiqi brought in the value aspect of it. I think 21st century is creating a completely different, creating the set of values. Let's say that take a look at the economy, jobs, etc., etc. I think this value of working for wages is 400 years old. It came with the Industrial Revolution. And then the more wages you earned, the better you were, your status in the society. And then if you're a manager, then you are superior to the worker and all that. The whole thing was created. And as you rightly pointed out, lots of jobs are getting automated now. Manufacturing, services. And so, and the 21st century learner, one other discerning feature about the young generation growing up now is they have a great sense of dignity. I mean, they want dignity above all. The days of common slavery or wage slavery seem to have gone. People are saying, I am an individual. I think that individualism has gone to the other extreme now, and they want to be seen as, do you give me dignity? I see that all the time. We train young adults to join the workforce. And we found time and again, it's not about the salary. It's about how you treat these young trained people. And if you're not willing to treat them right, they don't want the job. And in a new environment where, because of automation, what is likely to happen, and this is the thing that's haunting me, I'm not an economist, maybe in the world to come, maybe in 30, 40, 50 years, there'll be a lot of work but no jobs. There'll be work to keep the environment right, to keep your neighborhood clean, to look after the kids. And the society is getting so prosperous, we're generating so much wealth, that there'll be enough for everybody, really. I mean, I'm sounding like a communist version, but in reality, that may happen because you've got the food production going in a certain direction. It may not be necessary for you to work 8 hours a day. I don't know, that's gone for a toss in many countries. It's gone to 12 hours. And so now to live as a human being, not only for wages, but to live with dignity, to live in communities where you can take care of your own community, to build your own self. I've always felt that we're treating technology and stuff, but art is the highest form of human creation.
So, could I ask for and this is a simplistic question, but we talk about automation, and at the same time we talk about information and opportunity. For the poorest in the world, is technology a friend or an enemy?
I think it's a friend. It's not an enemy. I mean, it's a short-sighted enemy, perhaps. Immediately it may sound like an enemy, but that technology gives you access to the whole world. The question is, what do you do with it? You may not be able to get the kind of a job that you want, but for the first time ever, you can probably learn everything that you wanted to about Leonardo da Vinci or anything that's going around the world. You can grow as a human being, and there somebody will ask a question, I'll grow as a human being, but will I have shelter? Now that's a different thing altogether. These things can be created, can be met. But I think these times are good for your growth as a human individual if you're only allowed to be so.
Thank you. Speaking of technology, I would be in trouble if I didn't mention hashtag GESF. Any of you are tweeting?
Should I pick up on the technology?
Please, look.
Thing. Firstly, I'm also, watching how people are watching this session. Some are doing it through their cameras. Some are tweeting as they go along. So there's some 21st century learning here as we speak. Technology. There are two consequences of technology from a learner's point of view that I think of. One is connectivity means it reduces distance. So in my classes now, you have students from Taipei and Bangalore and Shanghai and Toronto, and that distance has collapsed. The mode of interaction with content is also different. My 4-year-old has figured out that you don't need to know how to type Disney onto YouTube. You just say it, and it recognizes your voice, and you get the cartoon that he needs. He goes into Google Images, and he figures out what make of aircraft looks like what. He tried to change TV channels by swiping, but that still doesn't work at this stage. So that's the first consequence. The second one is you get very quick and immediate feedback. You get it through data. You're able to assess how you're doing, and you're able to gamify learning, which to me is a fascinating field. How do you turn learning into games? And maybe that is the antidote towards the low attention span that you talked about. My son spends hours on Minecraft, for example. If I could just get half of that time for more productive work.
So can I just ask you about that?
Yeah.
Especially you talked about data and immediate feedback. A lot of people have said the 21st century learner wants to be measured.
Yes.
They want immediate feedback. They're very used to that. However, there's an enormous gap between test results and actual life chances. We saw yesterday in Andreas Schleicher's presentation, you're better off being incredibly, from a test result standpoint, being incredibly poor in Shanghai than very rich in Norway and Sweden. But I'm not sure from a life chances standpoint, I would choose to be very poor in China versus very rich in Sweden. So how do we bridge that gap between what we measure and what actually?
If what you're measuring is not a proxy for your life chances, then measuring it accurately and in real time doesn't help your life chances.
Life chances?
It's a much more multifaceted set of factors. We spoke about hard and soft skills. I think you do need hard skills. You need a base, a core set of skills from which you can then generalize out. But hard skills are not sufficient. If it were, then in the Indian cricket team, Sachin Tendulkar would have been captain throughout his career, and he isn't. He's the best technician, but he wasn't the captain. If it was all about soft skills, then President Obama would have won the Nobel Peace Prize in the early stages of his Sorry, that's the wrong example. So you're going to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
On the
Gabriel.
Madhav. I lost it.
Okay,
Gabriel.
No, and technology and technology and evaluation. I think that technology and is also helping to do this lifelong learning thing that 21st century learners need, because it allows you to know where you are, go on their own. Having all this self-paced learning that is so important when you are an adult. We are, at least some of us in this panel, we grew up learning at the same pace, the same kind of interest with other 25, 30 guys in our schools. And now learners can really do it at their own pace, at their own interest. All of us, if you look at your children, you know that some of them like some things different from another ones. Now technology allows you to do it much more at their own pace, and even more when you are an adult, because you know much more what you like, where you want to improve, what skills you need to improve, what things you need to do better to move up in your career.
Now, Kuepa is all about life chances.
Right.
You're trying to dramatically enhance the life chances of your students. What do you measure? What do you measure in your program?
That's first, we do all our learning on a software platform, because we want to provide this data for us to know how the student is doing, but also for the student to know how they are doing. And we try to provide, one more second, we try to provide measure these hard skills, how they are improving, programming skills or language skills or design skills or hospitality management skills, the different careers that we provide, but also we try to measure how they're improving the soft skills. Because at the end of the day, we know that to have a successful career, you depend much more on those soft skills than how much you know mathematics or how much you know design. So that's much difficult. It's much more difficult to teach through technology soft skills, and it's much more difficult to measure. How do you teach through technology empathy, or hard work, or understanding a problem and solving a problem? That is much more difficult, and it's difficult to scale it up because technology also helps access and scale up learning, at least in emerging markets where still the physical places are not.
Let me give Esther a chance to jump in, and then I'll come to Madhav. So I throw out this idea of measuring. You talked about a more holistic education. How do we measure soft skills? How do we even measure values?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm the best person to ask because I feel like often when we decide what's important to for education, we decide on what is measurable, and then we move it down to what should we do. Whereas I think, we should be asking what are the important things that we need to teach, and then, I mean, if we, can do the amazing things that we say we can do, for me, that's really a secondary question on, okay, now, if these are the important things, we need to start measuring that. But I just want to add something on the idea of, technology and how that really opens up, the learning environment for a lot of people and opens up access in a sense. I think the danger of online learning especially is that we will end up, sort of taking away the real-time teaching and the importance of, being in a class and saying that, people can just learn online. Whereas I think the power of online technology is that you can improve the way we teach at the moment by saying some things can happen online, but that makes the possibilities within a classroom, within a real-life learning environment, that much more important. But the two aren't, for me, two alternative options of learning. We need to structure them in the way that, they are complementary to each other.
Thank you.
So I remembered what I was going to say. You see, on the measurement side, there is somebody draws a line of reference, like PISA, for example. Do you know this? Or when you go for a job, there is a certain job requirement, and do you know this? And these are the controlling positions from where the learner or the prospective employee has to go and say, do I know it or do I know? Then the school examination is pretty much the same. Do you know this much in physics? Do you know this in chemistry? Do you know this in biology? If you turn around and ask kids, what do you know? That could give you a completely different answer. I did this, I'm playing with a lot of these concepts these days, and I had a group of young people there. Some of them were good at science, others were not so good at science. And both groups, I gave a simple assignment, and I said, I give you 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, how many words related to information technology can you put down? Did I say information technology? No, cell phone technology. How many can you write down? That's all I said. And the technically sound group was struggling to come up with the technical words, and they came up with 30 words or something. Whereas the one that was not technically sound came up with all kinds of things, including application of technology, about finding, dating and all kinds of things. And they said this is all connected to technology. They had more open mind than the technology group. My point is, it's again, I think if you put it in the learner's court, then, it's like a market and say, I can do this. The question is, do you want it? If you don't want it, that's fine, I'll go somewhere else. And that diversity of needs from the employment side as well are going to increase.
So to follow up on that, you ask employers what they need. Hard skills, but also innovation, creativity. A lot of people look at traditional schooling and think it's a factory for killing creativity in children. What do you wish schools would do differently?
What do you wish?
What do you wish schools would do differently?
you're asking me, then I'm saying I wish we unschooled the whole society.
Okay.
Because school by design is a center for regimentation. But the school is an essential daycare center.
Should we just have daycare?
Excuse me. So, no. So there is a need for children to be in a safe place. There's a need for young people to hang out and learn from each other. They can create a learning environment. They can learn in groups. But I think it's time that we promote this sort of a group learning and non-linear learning. It's not about what you learn in 7th grade and 8th grade and 9th grade. It's about what is it that you want to learn as a group. If this is what you want to explore and go linearly or whatever randomly and acquire certain skills, learning being the most important, learn to learn. If that skill you have, then you can learn most anything. Why wait for you to grow up to be an 8th grader or 10th grader or 13th grader to learn something? The education in the school system is an extremely linear system which says when you will learn what. It's also a filter. If you clear your 10th grade, you clear your 12th grade, then you can go to the university. So everything is directed at going to the university, going to do your MBA program, whereas the way the whole world is developing, and especially the information technology, is completely random access, non-linear system. It's unnatural to put kids in that system.
I do. If I give you a caricature of what are some of the hires that go wrong, you pick the best people from a university setting and you bring into a knowledge worker setting, what goes wrong? There's three things that cause people to fail in that transition from university into the workplace. One is the non-linearity of the learning experience at work. It doesn't come, the challenges in the workplace don't come neatly stacked up in a sequence of chapters, chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. You start with chapter 18, then you go down to 6, and then to 13, and back down. And over a period of time, you would have covered the book, but it is non-linear, and you shouldn't be floundering in that situation. The second one is the incomplete instruction. So if somebody doesn't give you the assignment in a hard-bound, complete manner, some people just freeze up and they aren't able to act. That also doesn't work. And the third one is influence without authority. You ask somebody to go and get something done, and most of the time it requires collaboration, it requires persuasion, and you need to be able to exercise influence over people that you have no command and control authority over. Some people do that well, some people don't do that well. You need these three aspects as a necessary condition if you are to be the 21st century learner. Okay. Networking. I mean, even here in the last day and a half, most of you with better networking skills have a significant edge over me on what we can achieve in a conference like this. It's a huge determinant.
So I want to make sure we have time for questions. One last question for you, Madhav, from me before I throw it to the audience. You talked about learners with short attention spans, low patience. They want to work for more than wages. That's not what their parents would have experienced. In your work, what do we do, or what should we do with the parents? How do they support this new vision?
So wages are a reality. They have to earn the wages. And so they have to learn certain things. What I'm saying is there's a conflict in what they desire and what they get. And this is bound to be. And there is social and individual pain in this. Whenever changes happen, we all human beings go through that. So that will have to be taken care of somehow. On the other hand, you see more and more, I mean, in a traditional society in India or any South Asia, I'm sure in Africa as well, kids were expected to take care of their parents. And increasingly, either that's not possible or that's not happening. So the parents are more or less on their own, and somehow we are building social security or whatever, or the parents are not being looked after at all. So different solutions will have to come, and the burden of looking after parents. I'm wondering, in the United States, I think for a number of decades, maybe a couple of centuries, the next generation was better than the previous. And this generation now is probably the first one that is likely not to be better than the previous generation, economically better off or whatever. So everybody has to get used to a new completely set of circumstances. And so the more you enable a young person to look after himself and in a group community fashion, not tell them that you are on your own, but say that, look, please function in groups, create a community, support each other. I think this community support atmosphere is going to be extremely important going forward, whether you take care of your parents or your neighbor or your friend. I think these are values that are going to be essential going forward. No, I'm sure people will figure those out, and that does happen. But I think we've got to look at the future and say this is going to be extremely important.
Gabriel?
I want to add one condition to that, what Lutfey was saying about it, how you successfully go from school to work. And the other one that we see very often in the workers that success is how to become the startup of you. No? In addition to the conditions you mentioned, you need to adapt to change much more than what we needed to adapt 30 years ago. And even if you work in a corporation, even if you work in a bank, in a big government, you need to understand that this kind of implicit contract between the corporation and the individual is broken. It doesn't work anymore. 30, 40 years ago, our parents were starting a company, on a corporation, on a big bank. Their careers are finished in the same place. Now, many studies show that young people will change their careers or their jobs 15, 20 times in their careers. So you need to have that ability to adapt, that ability to be an entrepreneur. Even if you are in a big corporation, you need to have that skills. No?
All right. Do you want to add something? I'm going to throw it to the audience.
I just want to add a last point, and it has to do with what you sort of touched on also about learner motivation, and and also wanting to do something more than just a job or having a broader thing to work for. And I think the way education systems are currently structured are very motivation is extrinsic, like you learn because you want to get a degree or you want to get a good grade. And that's not just bad for the individual, what they're learning. It's also bad for employers or whoever wants to have those learners, because it means that a certificate we don't know what a certificate really, tells you about a person. And I think, and that's why I emphasize the fact that we need to help learners connect more with their realities and their problems around them, is because I think then you start getting young people who are intrinsically motivated, that you feel that you can have a purpose and your passions can make a difference. And that's a whole nother type of motivation that's not just only good for your community and your society, but it's also good, to promote those problem-solving, creative and imaginative
Thank you.
skills.
I was trying to subtly signal, see if there are microphones. Great. Can I throw it to the audience? Who has a question for our panel? If you could introduce yourself, and if it's for a particular panelist, please say so, please.
My name is Zainab, and I have two questions to all the panelists. First one is that from where I come from, in developing countries, test marks are what you say the measure of one's success and job security. And if people have so many financial burdens, they may not be able to focus on the greater human concerns. So for some people, when we reach that level of self-actualization, we can say this. But for more basic people, which is the majority, this won't be practical. And second question is, how can we focus on the greater human concerns when the organizational goals of a school or our curriculum is conflicting with those of ours as a learner? Oh, just two questions.
I didn't get that last one.
Did you get that, Esther?
What was the second question? I didn't get that.
Well, I mean, I think it's important that we realize, we're not certain that people who are currently in our education systems are going to be employed. The statistics tell you that a lot of people are either unemployed or underemployed. The one thing that we know is that everybody is going to be a citizen, and that you will have to make sense of the society you live in. Therefore, I think it's not just added skills or sort of a luxury to be able to live within a complex society. And I don't think, you're talking about specific skills that you learn to be employed, but employers are also more and more saying that it's about a certain disposition, it's about having certain skills that I don't think are different to making a difference in society or being employed. So I think we must move away from the idea that those are two different priorities. That being skilled to have an influence in your society and having an influence in the working environment are two different things. And that really, if we're talking about having a curriculum for complexity and uncertainty, there's no better way to learn that than to live within complexity and with your peers deal with complex issues and live within that changing and uncertain circumstances.
Anyone like to add anything?
Yeah, I agree. There's no trade-off. There is no such thing as job security anymore. So there isn't a safe option where you go down the trodden path and that gives you a job for life. The only thing that gives you the best chances is that you're able to enrich your competencies, your skills, that give you intrinsic motivation, that help you keep at it for longer, helps you link with it authentically, and economically speaking, it enhances your chances. And ironically, that's more secure in this new world order than what you may have thought to be the traditional path to job security.
My name is Rolando. I'm from the Philippines. I'm from the UN Youth Group. I have 2 points. The first one is you mentioned about independence of learners and access to technology. I'm practically concerned about young people, learners with disabilities, for example, who remain to be marginalized in terms of these opportunities we have around us, those with intellectual disabilities, for example. The second point that I have is there was a mention about learners nowadays as being independent and have the authority. I'm practically concerned how the society, especially family and teachers, perceive this. Because in the country where I come from, a lot of parents and teachers complain about learners nowadays. They say they don't respect us anymore. Like learners nowadays are very complicated. And this results to physical abuse because, the teachers and even the parents don't understand the dynamics of our learners nowadays. So children are more exposed to these vulnerabilities within society. So how do we bridge the gap in ensuring that the family and the society understands the dynamics of the 21st century learners nowadays? Thank you.
You have an answer, Madhav?
I don't know whether there's a flat answer as to how to do it. I think, again, this is a clash of values. I think it is important that parents also start learning that this is a new paradigm and that I cannot treat my kid like my father treated me. I think a lot of us learn that. The children take a little longer to figure that out, that I cannot treat my parent just about any way that I wish. I think it's a balancing act. Everybody's trying to figure it out. Sometimes it takes many more years when you're a grown-up with your own children, you figure it out a little better. It's a learning process. The society has changed dramatically and it'll go on changing. There are things that we'll have to shed, things that we'll have to carry forward. There's no...
I do think that there's a great complexity in, what we're talking about here are very important ideas, but how does that play out on the ground? And as a teacher myself, none of the teachers or very few teachers that are currently in the job have really thoroughly engaged with what we're talking about here. And it's not always just an unwillingness to change. It's just like, how do you practically do that? And I think in general, there's a lack of support for teachers, not teacher trainings or going for a week here to learn about, new skills or new ways of approaching education, but having more of a mentor system within the education system that help teachers make these drastic changes within the way they do things. Because otherwise we can talk about this forever and it won't.
Any teachers? There are a lot of teachers in the room.
But I don't see why you would resort to physical abuse when switching off Wi-Fi does the trick.
Good morning.
Please-
Here.
Sorry,
My name is Anthony Joseph. I'm from GEMS. There was a mention that was made about soft skills, values, and knowledge. Now, I think as a 21st century learner, learners are juxtaposed between learning for knowledge and when they're exposed to job-oriented learning. You train a 21st century learner for a set of skills, and by the way, technology is moving. By the time he finishes education, those skills that are learned becomes obsolete. And there was also a mention made about the design of a school or the design of education imparted in a school. They are also, but very truly said, daycare centers. So having said all this, what are we looking at for the 21st century learner? Are we looking at him? At the end of the day, he's got to make some money also. So what are we looking for him? Is there a need for a drastic change, the entire design of the school? Thank you.
Well, we got your answer earlier. What about the rest of you? Massive overhaul or incremental change?
I mean, if I want to say what I really think,
Please.
I would agree and say like a massive change in how we approach things, because I think, you know, we're currently seeing how people are tinkering at the edges, trying to, you know, make this a bit different or this a bit different. I don't think we're gonna get fundamental change by that, because I think what you really, there's a quote, I'm not gonna say it perfectly, but saying that the 21st century illiterates are not going to be people who can't read and write, but those people who can't learn and unlearn and relearn. And that's not something we're currently learning in schools. I mean, the fact is that we're trying to talk with certainty about uncertainty. And what we need to teach learners is how to continuously adapt, that the skills or the knowledge that you might have now, you're going to have to change. And that's more of a disposition or a sort of a being in the world that we have to teach.
Lutfey, massive change?
Yeah, well, look, I went to a United World College, and I'd like to believe that they're as progressive on this as I'd like them to be. However, even within that context, the ones that did really, really well are the ones, some of the Scandinavian students who were taught, before they came to this college, who were taught how to study, who were taught how to learn. So I think what we need to train people for is how to be trainable as opposed to the specific domain. Spoke about people coming to this country to work. I remember there was a time when vocational training was about repairing air conditioners. And then the box air conditioners got replaced with the split ACs. And suddenly your skills became obsolete because that was the wrong way of training. So you need to train to be trainable. And the more we can learn how to learn and how to unlearn, the better.
It's interesting. I don't know if they still do it. My mother's Danish, and it used to be the required first course you did at every university in Denmark was philosophy. So they felt you had to do philosophy first before you went on. Michael? Sorry.
I think it's easy to see why the curriculum of the future needs to pay much more attention to skills and development of learning skills. I don't believe that these are skills that become obsolete. I think techniques become obsolete quickly, but the kind of generic skills, how to learn, how to think analytically, these will not go out of date. However, I do think there's a danger as we summon up the willpower to deal with this through reform of the curriculum, that we kind of disrespect content, and content is 20th century or 19th century. I think this is understandable, because I think what's gone wrong in public education is that the extension of content demand has become a form of selection. So you have memory-based testing at age 18 in many public systems to determine who progresses. And this has rightly given content a bad name. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. These generic skills won't be a lot of use unless you've mastered principles of mathematics. And sure, there's some optionality around the edges, but there's a core you'll need to master. You'll need to master your own language and probably at least one other. And having the skills to learn languages is great, but you will actually have to know some languages as well as have the ability to learn them in future. I could continue, but actually defining and defending useful content is going to be absolutely vital, even as we undergo a skills revolution in the curriculum. Thank you.
I saw a lot of nodding, so I won't ask for a response. It looks like we have a 21st century learner here who had the microphone taken away from him, so I'm going to give him a chance to have it.
Hi, my name is Chirag, and I'm the deputy head boy at Cambridge International School. My question to all of you is that, do you believe that there is a possibility of developing a generic core curriculum that is adapted for a 21st century learner to develop global skills, then struggle in adapting with the cross-cultural links? An example I could give is that studying in a British curriculum, it's kind of difficult to get adapted to and study in an American university, since there are various differences in each curriculum that don't provide the same platform to each student. What could be the possible changes that you guys could suggest?
Core curriculum. What do children need to learn?
Well, it is possible to create a curriculum, but the question is whether it will be relevant everywhere equally. Because, and I don't think the curriculum companies will all agree to one curriculum because they have to sell many. But in theory, yes, you can define the core skills, the areas that people need to learn. But in different countries, I suspect that the needs and the way they'll be rolled out, that the way they'll be learned, will be different, at least for some time to come, until we are a completely globalized, internationalized society.
Probably only have time for one or two more, please.
Hello. Hello, my name is Sabadnan and I'm from Same Skill Cambridge International. Listening to all the conversations, I think we're going back to one point, and it's a bit of conclusion, but a question as well for a panel like this and a platform like Global Education and Skills Forum. To all the teachers in the room, we know there should be a very strong link between learning objectives and plenary. There's been a lot of work done in terms of how teachers teach skills and curriculum. So I believe to engage learners nowadays, you have to teach them through skills. You can't just do content-based teaching. If they are engaged, it is through skills. But the problem is not how we are doing our job in the schools, it's about what is their plenary. So when they exit from schools, they have to sit in an exam, which is individual performance for 3 hours, and that's the filter. That's their entry point in university. So all the work done is on the side, and their entry to a supreme university is through exam results. Now, these students get into university, do really well, do different projects, but then again, to enter to a really good job is their individual self-marketing in that one interview. So I think there is a huge gap between what we do in school and what's the end point, what's the plenary of that learning journey. And I really find this gap in every platform, that there's nothing been done so far to align those starting and ending points. So I want to know what can be done, when will it be done? We talk about skills, ways to do it, curriculums, but the final point is not defined. Thank you.
So the gap. Go ahead.
Should I make an attempt?
Please.
So what you say is factually correct. It's hard to refute that, but I think it's a reflection of life. Most things in life require us to go through proxies and tests and filters that are sometimes unfair and certainly very reductionist and can't capture the full summation of everything that we represent. But when I look at certain work environments where perhaps you do go through a test to get in through the door, and 10 people get in through the door, and you could rank their scores from 1 to 10 on that narrow set of metrics, within a short period of time, it's quite possible for the person who was number 10 in that scoring mechanism completely leapfrogs and does better than somebody else, because that person happens to have a wider set of skills which shine through over time. So you could argue that there was an element of unfairness in that the filter was too narrow, but to the extent that 10 people went through it, of those 10, over time, the roundness of skills of the other person comes through.
So we're about to run out. Last question, last question.
Thank you. It's not really a question. I'm Ranju. I'm the principal of GEM School. I just want to say, when I address teachers and parents, many often I ask them, do we teach children how to move their thumb on the game console? And the answer is no. Neither do teachers nor parents teach them. But this is a skill that they learn on their own because they're interested in. They have lots of choices to make using that skill in different situations. And that's what my message is, that if we can make that learning objective, interesting, fun, and have lots of options, which is adaptable as well. We're talking about job markets and interests and what is needed and all those things. If we can make that adaptable, I think learning would happen, and it would happen on its own. Perhaps we talk about teachers just as facilitators and not really teaching a content or a skill even. So just making it very clear to them, I think would happen.
Thank you. So we're about to run out of time. I get the pleasure of asking the last question, and I want to give each of the panelists a chance. We're talking about technologies. We're talking about large unemployment. We're talking about new life skills. So I'm going to go around. 30 years in the future, if you close your eyes and imagine it, what really excites you and what absolutely terrifies you of the possibilities?
The one that in the subset of values and soft skills that we haven't spoken about that is close to my heart is I think we need to be taught on how to conduct conflict. There's a lot of destructive conflicts that goes on right now, and we swing between not going into confrontations because we want to avoid having a fight to it erupting because over time dissatisfaction accumulates. I think if we can teach ourselves to fight in a better way, where you have constructive conflict with a true appreciation for diversity, a true appreciation for two sets of truths being acceptable at the same time, then some of the extreme form of conflict that we have right now would not be as intense as we see right now.
All right, Esther, what's the big opportunity?
So,
Good or bad?
I think I want to draw back to what I said at the beginning and the idea of young people not only being the leaders of the future, but really empowering young people to be leaders today. And I think a lot more moving towards young people starting their own opportunities and not the conversation being completely directed on, how can we fit into the employer needs and how can we, fit into that? But how can we see a movement of young people? And that's what we're really trying to do at the UN Youth Advocacy Group, is to say that we underestimate the power of young people, and what we should be starting in school is helping them start organizations that they really want to work in, that they really believe do what they want to do and what makes a difference, and really see a movement of young people. I mean, Malala is probably the best example at the moment of a young person who's started a whole global movement of young people driving change. And I think we have to change our perceptions of young people just being learners to being active citizens while they learn, and that being a continuous process.
All right, so young people, the protagonists in their own story, 20, 30 years, Gabriel?
I think that the gap that we are seeing between the massive change in society and the very slow change in schooling could be perhaps reduced by technology, by bringing technology to education and making a good individual and massive education at the same time.
Last word, please.
I think the opportunities are very exciting, that lots of things can be done and are likely to happen as well. What terrifies me is that if it falls apart, because the disintegration of, you can blame a system all you want, but as long as it's there, it functions badly or whatever. But if it disintegrates without a proper replacement, then we are going to have a lot of trouble. It's good to say they're learners and so on, but if these learners don't learn to organize knowledge, then we are going to be in a lot of trouble.
Let's work on the replacement. Please thank our panel. Thank you so much. Thank you.